The way people remembered it, the summer of 1957 in Briar Creek, Pennsylvania, started out slow and ordinary. The kind of quiet that makes a small town feel safe, even when it isn't. Back then, the mornings smelled like wet grass and chimney smoke, and the only real noise came from freight trains growing past the hills at dawn. Folks left their doors unlocked. Kids rode bikes along the dusty shoulder of Ridge Road, and every neighbor knew exactly who lived in every house for 3 streets in any direction. Nothing dangerous was supposed to happen here. That's what Ava Delaney believed the morning her 5-year-old daughter Ava rode her brand new red bicycle toward Briar Creek Elementary. Ava was the kind of child who carried light with her. Bright hazel eyes, soft blonde curls tied each morning with a pale pink ribbon, and that way of humming under her breath when she was excited. She kept a tiny sketchbook in her backpack, always stopping to draw cats, clouds, or whatever made her curious. Aaron would watch her sometimes, kneeling on the floor, pencil tapping her bottom lip, lost in a world only children get to inhabit. But on that particular morning, Ava was in a hurry. She wanted to ride ahead before the older kids crowded the road. The sky glowed pale blue, the kind of early light that feels like a promise. Aaron packed her lunch, straightened her ribbon, kissed her cheek, and sent her off with a reminder. "Be home right after class, sweetheart." Ava nodded, grinning wider than the sunrise itself. Jack Delaney, a steel worker on the morning shift, had already left for Altoona. The radio played soft children's music in the kitchen, and the scent of coffee clung to the air long after he walked out the door. Aaron stood by the sink for a moment, watching her little girl pedal toward the line of maple trees where the road dipped into the quiet stretch leading to town. A neighbor, 2 houses down, Mrs. Carolyn Fielding, waved from her porch as Ava passed. She remembered later how the little girl's laughter floated on the air, and how just a few car lengths behind her, a dark green pickup slowed to a crawl before turning onto a narrow side road. At the time, it didn't mean anything. In Briar Creek, trucks slowed all the time. People stopped to chat. Nothing was unusual, until it was. By noon, Aaron started noticing the silence in the house. No footsteps on the porch, no sound of the screen door creaking open. She glanced at the clock. Ava should have been home. Maybe she stopped for flowers or wandered into the bakery like she sometimes did. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Aaron grabbed her coat and stepped outside. The road looked the same as always, quiet, lined with trees, sunlight cutting through the leaves. She walked the familiar mile toward the school, calling Ava's name in a voice that grew thinner with each unanswered breath. "Ava? Ava, honey?" No reply. Just wind moving through branches. Near the bend in the road where kids often stopped to skip stones, something pink caught her eye. A small ribbon. Ava's ribbon. Half pressed into the dirt, its edge torn like it had been pulled too fast or snagged on something. Aaron's heart seized. She knelt, palms shaking so badly she could barely lift the delicate strip of fabric. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Every instinct in her body screamed that something terrible had happened. Where were Ava's tire tracks? Why wasn't her little red bicycle anywhere on the path? Aaron broke into a run. She reached Mrs. Fielding's house breathless, asking if she'd seen anything at all. The neighbor only remembered that same green pickup. Panic flooded Aaron's chest. Within minutes, she was sprinting back home, tears streaking her cheeks, fumbling for the phone. Her voice trembled as she told the operator her daughter hadn't come home. Moments later, the call reached Briar Creek's tiny police station. Sheriff Ray Donovan, a man built like a stone fence with a calm voice and sharp eyes, stood from his desk the second he heard the words, "missing child." He radioed his 2 deputies, Hal Peterson and Jim Carver, both young, both inexperienced with anything more serious than a barn break-in. They reached the Delaney home in minutes. Aaron met them outside, gripping the torn ribbon so tightly the fabric was wrinkled between her fingers. She led them to the road, her voice cracking every time she tried to speak. Sheriff Donovan walked slowly, scanning the ground, the slight slope of the dirt, the maple roots pushing through the earth. And then, a few hundred yards from the house, they found it. Ava's small red bicycle lay tipped on its side near the weeds, the handlebars crooked, the front wheel gently turning in the breeze like it had only just fallen. Nearby lay her favorite cloth doll, one arm frayed, half buried in leaves. There were no footprints, no sign of struggle, no clear direction she might have gone. Just silence. Donovan crouched, brushing leaves away from the dirt. Deep tire impressions, fresh ones, cut across the soft ground, angling toward the thin woods west of the road. Medium-width tread, rear tire worn unevenly, the kind of detail only a mechanic or a good sheriff would notice. He motioned to his deputy. "Mark and bag everything." Cameras clicked, notes scribbled, volunteers gathered, searchers spread out through the trees. Reporters arrived before the sun started dipping. The world widened around Ava Delaney like a nightmare that wouldn't end. By sundown, the yellow tape stretched across the quiet road looked like a wound carved into Briar Creek. The sheriff wrote the first line in his notebook. "Female child, 5 years old, missing. High probability of abduction." The church bell rang at dusk, and for the first time in Briar Creek's history, the town realized it was no longer safe.
Night settled over Briar Creek like a heavy blanket, but nobody in town slept. Porch lights burned through the dark. Windows glowed behind half-drawn curtains as families whispered fears they'd never imagined speaking out loud. A child was missing. A good child. A known child. And the kind of innocence Briar Creek had always taken for granted suddenly felt fragile, like something that could be snatched away in broad daylight. At the crime scene, floodlights hummed. The yellow caution tape trembled in the rising wind. Sheriff Ray Donovan stood beside the abandoned bicycle long after his deputies left for the night, replaying every detail in his mind. The tire tracks. The torn ribbon. The eerie neatness of the scene, like someone had taken Ava gently, not violently, but taken her nonetheless. Deputy Hal Peterson approached, his breath fogging in the cool air. "Sheriff, you should get some rest." Donovan didn't look up. "A 5-year-old girl doesn't just disappear, Hal." Hal shifted uneasily. "What about the footprints? Maybe she wandered off after she fell." Donovan pointed at the tire impressions beside the bike. "Those weren't there yesterday." He tapped the page of his notebook, the worn treads, the angle of departure, the fresh, damp soil pressed deeper where the weight of the vehicle shifted. That truck stopped here. It didn't just pass through. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Donovan straightened and said quietly, "Get the county line stations on the phone. We're pulling every registration list on trucks that match this tread." By morning, the tiny police station was buzzing like a hornet's nest. Donovan drank black coffee straight from the pot as he scanned vehicle records. Deputies interviewed every neighbor along Ridge Road, every parent at Briar Creek Elementary, every worker who'd passed through town that morning. One name kept returning in whispers. Henry Adler. 28, mechanic, lived a few streets from the Delaney house. Quiet, kept to himself, worked the night shift at a garage near Altoona, sometimes odd, always alone, and, most importantly, he drove a green 1956 Ford F-100 pickup. Donovan sent deputies to confirm the registration. They did. By mid-afternoon, he was already walking up the cracked sidewalk to Henry Adler's small rented house at the end of Laurel Street. Mechanical parts littered the yard, rusted mufflers, coiled springs, metal scraps. The place looked less like a home and more like a workshop someone had forgotten to clean for a decade. The green pickup sat in the open garage, its engine still slightly warm. Donovan knocked. The door opened slowly. Henry stood there wearing grease-stained jeans and a white t-shirt. His dark hair was uncombed. His eyes, deep and unreadable, flicked from Donovan to the deputies behind him. "Sheriff, something wrong?" Donovan kept his voice steady. Mind if we talk inside? Henry shrugged and stepped back. The house smelled of oil and old coffee. Newspapers lay stacked on every surface. Tools clinked underfoot with each step. Donovan didn't sit. "Where were you this morning between 7 and 9? Henry wiped his hands on a rag. "Sleeping. Worked the night shift." "You leave early?" "Headache. Came home around 6:30, slept all morning." Donovan's eyes narrowed. "Anyone who can confirm that?" "No," Henry said simply, folding the rag in his hands. "I live alone." The sheriff motioned to Deputy Peterson, who stepped into the garage. Moments later he called out, "Sheriff, the engine is warm." Henry stiffened. "I moved it just a few minutes ago." "You drive it this morning?" "No." "Mind if we look around?" Henry swallowed hard. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Then you won't mind." They searched the house meticulously. No clothing fibers, no children's belongings, no blood, no sign of Ava. But on a cluttered workbench near the back window sat a small framed photograph, a birthday party, candles, homemade cake, and in the center, unmistakably, Ava Delaney. Aaron had mentioned giving a copy to Henry months earlier as thanks for fixing Jack's car, but seeing it here, out of place, surrounded by rusted tools, felt wrong. Too personal, too deliberate. Henry noticed Donovan staring and said quickly, "The Delaneys gave that to me. I forgot to return it." Donovan turned the frame over. No dust on the glass. Fingerprints smudged along the edges. It looked handled recently. "Did you see Ava yesterday?" "No." "This morning?" "No." "Did you drive past Ridge Road today?" "No." The answers came too quickly, too clean. Donovan closed his notebook. "We'll be in touch." As he walked down the cracked front path, he murmured to Hal, "Get the tire samples and check his alibi again. Something doesn't add up." That night, the sheriff's office stayed open late. Volunteers formed lines through the woods with flashlights. Men from the fire department set up temporary stations along the creek. Search dogs barked into the darkness as handlers urged them forward. In the distance, the first news vans arrived. Heavy steel lights stabbed through the trees as reporters flooded the scene. Cameras clicked, microphones pointed. They shouted questions toward anyone wearing a badge, every word slicing deeper into the panic spreading through town. Inside the Delaney home, Erin sat at the kitchen table gripping a cup of untouched tea. Her hands shook. Jack paced circles around the living room, rubbing the back of his neck until it reddened. Every knock at the door jolted Erin upright, but none of them brought Ava home. By the time dawn broke again, the search had grown to hundreds. Local families, off-duty officers from nearby towns, even hunters familiar with the woods. They swept through underbrush, checked abandoned cabins, drained small ponds near the quarry. Helicopters from Harrisburg hovered overhead, scanning for heat signals. Nothing. By the third day, exhaustion took root. The volunteers grew quieter, the flashlights dimmer, the hope thinner. On the fourth day, Sheriff Donovan called in state police and canine units. They arrived with trucks, trailers, search grids, and a sense of urgency Briar Creek hadn't seen since the war. The entire area was mapped into sectors. Teams moved in slow lines through the forest. Dogs were given Ava's doll to smell, sniffing, pulling, circling. For a moment, one dog yanked hard toward the creek, barking sharply, but the trail evaporated near the water. Deputy Carver shook his head. "Rain washed everything out. We're losing time." Time. They were running out of it. And Briar Creek was beginning to feel it. Newspapers printed photos of the small red bicycle splattered with mud. Headlines blared across the state. "Girl vanishes in quiet town." Whispers swelled. Rumors twisted facts. Some blamed strangers. Some blamed Henry Adler. Others whispered that no one really knew what happened in the Delaney home. Sheriff Donovan ignored the noise and returned again and again to the same spot, the bend near the maple trees where Ava's ribbon lay in his hand the day it all began. Something happened here. Something they were missing. And whatever it was, it had taken a little girl right out of the heart of Briar Creek.
The longer Ava Delaney was missing, the more Briar Creek began to fracture. What had once been a quiet Pennsylvania town now carried a tension that clung to the air like humidity before a storm. Every porch conversation turned into a theory. Every passing truck triggered suspicion. People double-locked their doors at night, something they hadn't done in decades. Reporters multiplied. They parked their vans along Maple Row and Ridge Road, cameras trained on the Delaney home. Some were respectful, others were relentless, asking Erin questions she couldn't bear to hear. Do you think she wandered off? Is it true you let her right alone? Any issues inside the home we should know about? The questions felt less like concern and more like accusations. Erin couldn't even step outside without shaking. Jack tried guarding the porch, but the swarm was too constant, too loud, too invasive. By the end of the week, the investigation was spiraling. The governor's office called Sheriff Ray Donovan directly, demanding updates. State investigators arrived with sharpened eyes and clipped voices, and behind every exchange there lingered an unspoken threat. If you don't make progress soon, the state will take over the case completely. Donovan didn't care about losing control. He cared about losing time. On the 7th day, a man approached the station holding a small envelope. Walter Dean worked at the old toll booth on the west end of Briar Creek, where the wooden bridge crossed Route 322. He was wiry, nervous, smelling faintly of sawdust and pipe tobacco. He held the envelope with both hands, like he didn't trust himself not to drop it. I figured I should show you this. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note. Short, strange, chilling in its simplicity. The little girl is safe now. Stop looking. No signature, no threats, no demands. Just that. Donovan stared at the words, feeling something coil tight in his gut. When did you get this? He asked. Came in the morning mail, same stack as usual. No return address, just this. Donovan showed the envelope to Hal Peterson. The postmark was blurred but legible enough. Mailed from Jacksonville, Florida, 2 weeks after Ava vanished. Hal exhaled sharply. What the hell is this? A prank? Donovan shook his head. No prank gets mailed from 800 miles away. Walter added quietly. Sheriff, that morning Ava disappeared, I saw a green pickup cross the bridge heading towards 322. Old model, single driver. Looked like it was moving slow, like something heavy in the back. Donovan's eye snapped to him. You're certain? Certain as anything. Only caught the first digit on the plate, 7-something. Paint was peeling. The detail slotted into place like a puzzle piece. Henry Adler's truck had a license plate beginning with a 7, and the paint, worn thin, flaked along the left side. Donovan's heart thudded. They were close, so close, but they still had nothing solid enough to act. He ordered handwriting analysis on the note, but technology in 1957 could only confirm what he already suspected. The writing didn't match Erin or Jack Delaney. Beyond that, nothing could be gleaned. No fingerprints, no distinctive marks. Just blue ink on ordinary stationery. But a letter like that suggested one thing. Whoever took Ava was confident she was alive and wanted the search to stop, which only intensified Donovan's determination. Over the next 2 weeks, the search widened across Briar Creek, the surrounding hills, and all the way down the creek bed that carved through the woods. Divers scanned the lake twice, then a third time. Dogs retraced every trail. Helicopters buzzed overhead like angry hornets. Volunteers waded through briars until their legs were scratched raw. At night, exhaustion blanketed the searchers. Deputy Carver rubbed his temples by the command tent. We're running out of places to look. It's like she vanished into thin air. Donovan stared at the glowing search map. Every trail marked, every cabin checked, every barn inspected. He pressed his thumb hard into the paper, willing it to give him something, anything. She didn't vanish. Someone hid her, and they hid her well. 3 days later, rain hit Briar Creek like a punishment. It washed away the last remaining impressions of footprints. It turned the dirt near the creek into a slurry. It blurred old tire marks until they disappeared completely. And it destroyed half the evidence collected from the bicycle site. When the lab called, Donovan gripped the phone. "Sheriff, I'm afraid the fabric fibers have molded. The soil samples too. Most of it's no longer viable." He closed his eyes. "What about the tire impressions? The photos were damaged, overexposed. Some details lost." "Which details?" "Enough that matching them definitively to any vehicle will be difficult." It felt like the world had pulled the case backward. Every day that passed, hope thinned. Aaron's face grew hollow. Jack aged a decade in a month. The Delaney home stood dark most nights, except for Ava's bedroom window where Aaron left a small lamp glowing, a signal for a child who could no longer see it. By the 4th week, the search officially scaled back. Not because anyone wanted to stop, but because the terrain was exhausted, the manpower depleted, and the weather had erased too many clues. The final summary report reached Donovan's desk like a blow. No viable evidence, no confirmed sightings. Search recommended for temporary suspension. Temporary. But everyone knew what that really meant. Deputy Peterson whispered, "Sheriff, maybe she wandered off. Maybe the truck was a coincidence." Donovan slammed his notebook shut. "There are no coincidences in a case like this. Someone took her. And unless we find something no one has looked at yet, this case is going to freeze." But nothing new appeared. Witness statements spiraled into contradictions. The green truck had turned toward the woods. No, the lake. No, west, towards 322. A tall man. No, average height. No, wearing a jacket. No, wearing a cap. Nothing fit. The days grew colder. Leaves turned darker. Reporters drifted to newer stories. And eventually, the inevitable happened. The metal file labeled Case number 57-BC-04, Missing Child, Ava Delaney, was slid into a drawer. The latch clicked shut, and the cabinet swallowed another mystery. The town gradually returned to its routines. Storefront lights glowed again. Church bells resumed their calm, familiar chimes. But the Delaney family was never the same. And Sheriff Donovan, who had built his career on instincts, not giving up, and never accepting the impossible, walked out of the station each night with the same unanswered question ringing through his mind. Where did Ava go? And how could a child be taken so silently without leaving even one trace big enough to hold on to? The answer would come decades later. But back then, no one in Briar Creek knew the story was far from over. It had only paused, waiting for the right eyes, the right time, and the smallest possible clue buried beneath more than half a century of dust.
For decades after the case was shelved, the story of Ava Delaney lingered in Briar Creek like a ghost the town refused to speak about. People still remembered the missing posters, the red bicycle, the doll left on the ground, but time softened the edges. Neighbors who once searched the woods grew older. Children who once whispered about the girl who vanished grew up and moved away. And the Delaney family, broken but breathing, slowly disappeared from the town where their lives had stopped. By the mid-1960s, Aaron and Jack Delaney moved to Harrisburg. Aaron sent letters every year to the state police begging, pleading to reopen the case. The replies were always the same. No new evidence, no possibility for review, no reason to believe anything had changed. But Aaron never stopped signing her letters with the same sentence. Please find my little girl, even if only the truth. The truth, however, lay buried, unseen, unreachable, waiting. Meanwhile, the man the sheriff once suspected, Henry Adler, quietly left Pennsylvania. 1 year after the search ended, he moved to Ohio, taking a job in a Youngstown auto shop.
He rented a small room above a bakery, worked long hours, spoke to almost no one. People who knew him described him as distant, lonely, almost invisible. No family, no friends, and no one who ever looked at him long enough to wonder what shadows he carried with him. He went on like this for 15 years. Then in April of 1972, Henry Adler's life ended on a quiet stretch of Route 422 when his car veered off the road, hit a guardrail, and burst into flames. Most assumed it was brake failure. Fire crews collecting debris found a scorched metal box behind the driver's seat, one that miraculously survived the fire. Inside were everyday items: a lighter, a wallet, a small notebook with burn marks along the edges. Ohio police cataloged the items and filed them away. No one knew that notebook contained the closest thing to a confession Henry Adler ever left behind. Scrawled among greasy engine diagrams and parts lists were faint pencil lines. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I just took the little girl away. No name, no date, no explanation." The words were logged as personal notes, not evidence, and sealed in a storage room with dozens of unrelated artifacts. And once again, the truth slipped into silence. When the 1980s arrived, cold case storage across Pennsylvania was overhauled, digitized, and sorted. Thousands of old files were fed into a new central database in Harrisburg. One of them was a thin folder labeled Briar Creek Missing Child 1957, case number 57 BC04. It contained only a handful of yellowed pages, a few smudged black and white photographs, a torn ribbon, witness statements, the sheriff's notebook summary, and nothing else. Most of the physical evidence had deteriorated or been lost in earlier storage purges. Back then, no one believed DNA would ever be more than a concept in a science journal. No one imagined technology would one day retrieve answers from a single microscopic trace. So when the file was moved into the cold case repository, no one expected it to be touched again. And for a long time, no one did. In 1998, a young officer named Mark Reddington joined the Huntington County Investigation Unit. Fresh out of training, curious, meticulous, and fascinated by old mysteries, he walked into the cold case room like someone entering an attic filled with forgotten stories. He read dozens of files, but one caught his breath. A black and white photo of a smiling 5-year-old girl, bright ribbon in her hair, a look of innocent confidence on her face. Ava Delaney. Reddington sat down and read everything. Every page, every note, every scribbled margin. Something about the case refused to let him go. It wasn't just the tragedy, it was the incompleteness. Too many loose ends, too many things that didn't add up. And one detail leapt out like a flare in the dark. The original tire tread analysis said medium with herringbone tread, rear tire worn unevenly. Reddington cross-referenced 1956 vehicle records. Only one common vehicle used that exact tire tread pattern, a 1956 Ford F-100 pickup. The same model Henry Adler drove. His pulse kicked up. He checked the old registration archive. Adler's truck matched the tire specifications exactly. The worn rear tread, the spacing of the grooves, the manufacturing batch. It was the closest thing to a match the case had ever had. He filed a formal request to reopen the investigation, citing this new correlation. And for the first time since 1957, the state reviewed the Briar Creek case. But hope lasted only days. When Reddington went to retrieve the original evidence, fabric samples, soil, tire casts, he was told the truth. Everything from that case was destroyed in 1979, molded, degraded, or thrown out during warehouse cleanup. All that remained were the badly exposed photos, and they weren't clear enough for digital enhancement. Reddington stared at the empty shelf where the evidence should have been.
A single match, no matter how compelling, meant nothing without supporting material. He tried reaching out to Ohio for information related to Henry Adler's death, but in the 1990s, interstate record access was nearly impossible. His inquiries were returned with a simple note: no confirmed connection between this subject and the Briar Creek case. His hands were tied. In his final memo, he wrote, "Significant likelihood the suspect vehicle belonged to Henry Adler. Unable to pursue due to missing evidence." The document was reviewed, stamped inactive, no further action, and returned to the drawer. The door shut. The cabinet locked, the lights switched off, and again, the truth slept. Another decade passed, but the case wasn't done. Not by a long shot, because in 2010, in a quiet archive room in Harrisburg filled with dust and forgotten paperwork, an investigative journalist named Eleanor Shaw opened a drawer that had not been touched in years. She wasn't looking for Ava Delaney, but Ava's story found her.
Eleanor Shaw never liked quiet newsrooms. She preferred digging through boxes, peeling back tape on forgotten files, and breathing in that peculiar smell archives carried: dust, cardboard, and the faint trace of stories that had waited too long to be told. She was a reporter who loved the chase more than the byline, and in 2010, when she stepped into the Pennsylvania State Archives for a routine research assignment, she had no intention of stumbling onto a mystery that would consume her for the next 3 years. She was there to write a piece about jurisdictional failures in mid-century missing persons cases. Dry, procedural, technical, the kind of article editors expected to die quietly on page 9. But fate had a different story in mind. While combing through a drawer of misfiled case summaries, Eleanor pulled out a thin, tan folder. The tab read, "Delaney, Ava, Briar Creek, 1957. She froze. She wasn't from that era, but the name was familiar, almost a local legend among investigative circles. A girl who disappeared in broad daylight. A case that had rattled a town but never produced an ending. A story people whispered about, but never understood. She opened the folder. Inside were the black and white photos. The red bicycle tipped on its side, the doll half buried in leaves, the ribbon in the dirt, and a picture of a little girl with bright hazel eyes and a smile that looked almost too alive to belong to someone whose story was unfinished. She sat back. There were only a few pages, but each one carried weight. Sheriff's notes, witness statements, search logs. Most cold cases, she read, felt distant, but this one felt different. The handwriting leapt out at her. Sheriff Donovan's scrawled determination, the urgency in his sentences, the way he underlined phrases like "no forced struggle," "vehicle likely involved," "green pickup," "driver unknown." But the most striking detail was the note dated 7 days after the disappearance. Truck appears to be a 1956 Ford F-100. Investigate H.A. H.A. Eleanor flipped through more pages until she found the name. Henry Adler. Mechanic, local, unmarried, lived alone. Suspect, but never charged. "Why not?" she whispered. She checked the evidence list. Tire casts, fiber filaments, soil samples, photographs, handwriting samples. All marked with the same crushing word. Destroyed. 1979. Eleanor knew what that meant. The case didn't go cold because it lacked suspects. It went cold because it lacked evidence. Evidence that should have been preserved. Evidence that might have changed everything. She closed the folder slowly. This wasn't just a missing child case. This was a story buried alive. Over the following months, Eleanor buried herself in everything she could find on Briar Creek, the Delaney family, and Henry Adler. She traveled to the old town, drove down Ridge Road, and stood at the bend where Ava disappeared. The maple trees were still there, Older, taller, their branches heavier but unmistakable. The place felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by the weight of unanswered questions. She visited the abandoned farmhouses in the woods. She walked along the creek bank where search dogs had once barked into the fog. She took notes, drew maps, and recorded interviews. Some townspeople remembered nothing. Some remembered everything. And some remembered just enough to stir the dust loose. At the Briar Creek Historical Society, an elderly woman named Linda Harper leaned in close as Eleanor showed her the faded photo. "Oh, I remember sweet Ava. I used to babysit her sometimes. Happiest child you ever saw. Do you remember the day she disappeared?" Her expression tightened. Everyone remembers that day. "Did you know Henry Adler?" Linda hesitated. "Knew of him, we all did. Kept to himself, not unkind, just off somehow, always tinkering with that old green truck." "Did folks think he was involved?" Linda sighed. "Some did, some didn't. Sheriff Donovan seemed sure, but without proof." She shook her head. "After a while, people just stopped talking about it." "Do you know what happened to Henry?" Linda's brows lifted. "Died in a car crash, didn't he? Out of state somewhere." "Strange fellow. Quiet end." After leaving the Historical Society, Eleanor sat in her rental car staring at the scribbled name in her notebook. Henry Adler. A man who lived alone, died alone, and perhaps taken something with him to the grave. There was one way to find out. She filed a request for documents related to Henry Adler's death in Ohio. It took nearly a year to get access. In late 2011, a thick envelope arrived from the Youngstown Sheriff's Office. Inside were inventory lists, crash reports, coroner's notes, and the item that made Eleanor's heart hammer against her ribs: a photograph of a small metal box recovered from the wreck. And beneath it, a scan of the notebook found inside. The grease-stained notebook, the one that survived the fire, the one that contained the line, "I never meant to hurt anyone. I just took the little girl away." Eleanor stared at the words for a long time, breath caught between disbelief and revelation. It wasn't a confession, not fully, but it was enough. Enough to reopen the wound, enough to demand another look, enough to call the one person who had spent decades unable to even imagine closure. The number wasn't easy to find. Ava Delaney was in her 70s now, living quietly outside Harrisburg. I found her through a nursing directory. I dialed the number with trembling fingers. The line clicked. A frail voice answered. "Hello? Mrs. Delaney. My name is Eleanor Shaw. I'm an investigative journalist, and I found something about your daughter." Silence. Then a soft inhale. "You found my Ava?" Emotion thickened Eleanor's throat. "I found something connected to the man Sheriff Donovan once suspected. Something in his personal belongings. Something that might help us understand what happened." Another long pause. "My husband passed away before he could know anything more," she whispered. "I've waited my whole life to hear someone say those words." Eleanor swallowed. "Mrs. Delaney, I think it's time the state takes another look." That night, Eleanor sat in her apartment surrounded by papers, maps, and files spread across the floor like the pieces of a puzzle she was slowly assembling. She wasn't naive. A confession halfway written wasn't the same as finding a child. But this was more than Briar Creek had ever had. With renewed determination, she filed a formal request with the Pennsylvania State Police to re-examine the case with modern tools and interstate access. Weeks passed before the reply came. Request accepted. Case reopened. Eleanor stared at the letter, pulse racing. For the first time since 1957, the investigation into Ava Delaney's disappearance was alive again, and the truth, finally, was stirring.
By early 2012, the Ava Delaney case was officially reopened, quietly, without press releases or cameras, Just a thin series of documents circulating between detectives who weren't yet sure why a 55-year-old missing child case suddenly mattered. But to Eleanor Shaw and to the Delaney family, it meant everything. The Pennsylvania State Police assigned 2 investigators to the reopening, Detective Laura Grayson, sharp and methodical, and Detective David Kilpatrick, a patient man with a background in advanced forensic analysis. They met Eleanor in a small conference room at the Harrisburg field office, where she laid out the evidence like a lawyer reopening a trial. The notebook from Henry Adler's car, the truck tread match noted by Officer Reddington in 1998, the letter mailed from Jacksonville, the inconsistencies in Adler's statements, and the glaring absence of any alibi. Kilpatrick tapped the table. "We don't have physical evidence. No fibers, no soil, no fingerprints. Everything's gone." Eleanor nodded. "But we do have something else, a pattern and a suspect who practically confessed." Grayson looked at the scan of Adler's notebook, eyes narrowing. "This is damning, but not conclusive." "It's what we have," Eleanor replied, "and it's more than anyone had before." The detectives exchanged a look, uncertain but intrigued. The case wasn't solvable in the traditional sense, but it wasn't dead either. Somewhere, buried between Pennsylvania and Ohio, was a thread that hadn't yet been pulled. Grayson closed the folder and stood. "Let's pull it." The first step was tracking Henry Adler's movements around the time of Ava's disappearance. Employment logs showed Adler took frequent weekend trips out of state, odd for a man who claimed to have no friends or relatives. Kilpatrick requested toll records from the old Route 322 bridge, now digitized. After several weeks, they received a scan of Walter Dean's 1957 logbook, the same one Eleanor had photographed in the archive. There, on the day Ava vanished, was a hand-scrawled line. Green pickup, first digit 7. Alone. Westbound 9:12 a.m. Ava disappeared around 8:30. The timeline fit, but the most important discovery came from Ohio. Grayson traveled to Youngstown to examine Adler's remaining personal effects in person. Most of it was junk, rusted keys, bolts, receipts, pocket knives. But in the bottom of a sealed box, she found a folded paper that hadn't been scanned or cataloged. A road map, marked with a thin pencil line. A route Adler took frequently, from Briar Creek south to Route 322, west toward Ohio, then dipping into back roads near the Pennsylvania-Ohio border. A single tiny X was drawn on the border of Tionesta Forest. Grayson stared at it for a long moment. A place remote enough to hide anything. A place no one would have thought to search in 1957. She called Eleanor immediately. "We're going to the site." Tionesta Forest looked untouched by time. Towering pines, moss-covered rocks, long stretches of uninhabited land. The air smelled of wet bark and old earth, heavy with the kind of silence that didn't welcome visitors. Grayson, Kilpatrick, Eleanor, in a small cadaver dog unit walked the coordinates marked by Adler's map. The trees thickened, the ground dipped, a narrow animal trail wound between fallen logs and uneven soil. After an hour of searching, one of the dogs halted, its ears forward, its posture rigid. A sharp bark split the quiet. Kilpatrick's stomach dropped. Grayson knelt beside the animal, gently encouraging it. The dog sniffed aggressively at the ground, circling a patch of earth sunken slightly lower than the surrounding terrain. "Here," Grayson whispered. "Something was buried here." Eleanor felt her heart slip into her throat. A forensics team arrived the next morning. They began excavating the site layer by layer, slow, meticulous, respectful. It didn't take long. 10 inches down, a small shoe appeared. Red leather, worn. Tiny. Eleanor clutched her chest, tears burning her eyes. They continued. A fragment of fabric, pink cotton, the size of a child's dress. More careful brushing, more silence, more breath held. Then, they found bones. Small, delicate, undeniably human. The forest felt impossibly still in that moment, like even the trees understood the gravity of what had been uncovered. Kilpatrick stepped back, swallowing hard. We need to identify remains formally, but this is her. Grayson reached for Eleanor's arm as she swayed. Eleanor whispered, "We found her. After all these years, we found her." Forensic anthropologists confirmed it days later. The remains were those of a child between 4 and 6 years old, matching Ava's height and build. The shoes matched what she wore the morning she vanished, and on a fragment of deteriorated cloth, they found a rusted metal hair clip, the same type Aaron always used to keep Ava's curls in place. This was Ava. There was no longer any doubt. When Eleanor went to see Ava Delaney, she braced herself for the fractured complexity of what she carried, closure and heartache at once. Aaron's nursing home was small, quiet, with faded wallpaper and the soft scent of lavender drifting down the hall. Aaron sat in a wheelchair near the window, sunlight touching her silver hair. Eleanor knelt beside her, taking her gentle, weathered hand. "We found her," Eleanor whispered. Her voice cracked. "We found your Ava." Aaron didn't speak first. A long, trembling breath escaped her lips. "My baby. After all this time, she's been waiting for me to know." Tears slipped down Eleanor's cheeks. "She was buried in Tionesta Forest. We believe Henry Adler took her. Evidence points overwhelmingly to him." Aaron nodded slowly, absorbing the truth like someone finally able to set down a weight carried too long. "I prayed someone would find her, even if I couldn't bring her home myself." Eleanor held her hand tighter. "You did. You never stopped." Aaron's eyes shifted toward the window, as if imagining a small girl running through the sunlight outside. "Thank you," she whispered. It was the gentlest kind of heartbreak, one wrapped in peace. The official report closed the case in early 2013. Conclusion: Ava Delaney's disappearance was the result of abduction and homicide committed by Henry Adler. Deceased. No prosecution, no trial, no chance for answers that might have eased the ache. But the truth, buried, forgotten, nearly erased, finally surfaced. Sheriff Ray Donovan didn't live to see the mystery solved, but his instincts were proven right. He had chased the right man all along, just with too little evidence and too few tools. His daughter, upon hearing the news, said, through tears, "My father never stopped believing she was out there. Today, I think he can rest." The town of Briar Creek honored Ava with a memorial near the bend in Ridge Road. A small stone engraved with her name, a carved ribbon, and the simple inscription, "Found at last." Every year since, people still place flowers at the base of the stone. Not just for Ava, but for every child whose story faded before it could be understood. And for Eleanor Shaw, the case changed everything. It reminded her why she became a journalist, not for headlines or awards, but for the fragile truth hidden underneath decades of dust. The story of Ava Delaney was never about how she vanished. It was about how a girl who disappeared in silence was finally heard again. A life stolen, a truth reclaimed, a mystery that refused to die until justice, imperfect, incomplete, but real, was finally found. And somewhere, in a quiet room with soft sunlight drifting across her lap, Ava Delaney whispered to the air, "I know where you are now, sweetheart." The promise she waited 55 years to keep.